Good evening, everyone. I'm really quite stunned by how many of you have come this evening, and I'm very grateful that you've come out for this. It gives me great pleasure to welcome members of our local Shawnigan community to this event hosted by Shawnigan Lake School. I'm Larry, I'm the headmaster. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. Increased engagement with our local community and the development of partnerships are very much part of the strategic vision for the school. During the course of this academic year, we've been delighted to host a series of events for our local community, from children's camps to candlelit carol service and Christmas dinner, from a town hall debate with local MP Alistair McGregor to charitable events on campus. We look forward to discussing how best to develop Shawnigan Village, and our students and staff are excited to be part of the conversation going forward. I've so far been invited to meet with the committee members of Think Shawnigan and the representatives from the CVRD. I was particularly pleased to learn from the CVRD that the process will also offer students at Shawnigan and in the local community the opportunity to contribute to discussions and decisions, and at the same time to pick up some ground level experiences and skills to complement their current work in the classroom. Inevitably, projects like this throw up both challenges and opportunities for us to consider and require patience, imagination, and determination as we consider the local area and what it will offer our families and the school, including future generations of students and staff. Sierra sent me off over the spring break with a copy of, I have it here, 13 Ways to Kill Your Community. And having read the book on a flight to Hong Kong, it's a privilege to welcome Doug Griffiths this evening to give us some insights as to how best to develop a community. This strikes very much at the heart of the school, as I see us as helping to guide and train the current generation of students to be the community builders of tomorrow. In whatever community, personal and professional, local and global, that they find themselves in during later life. We talk here at Shawnigan to the students and the staff about the 3 C's: conversation, compassion, and community, and they combine to make our North Star. In one chapter in his book, Doug observes, water is the foundational resource on which communities build. In early conversations with Sierra and then Gary Horwood, president of the Shawnigan Residents Association, on my arrival last summer as headmaster, I learned how the local community deeply appreciated how the school had stepped forward a few years ago to lend its support in both spirit and action over the proposed dumping of waste at the far end of the lake. This is an example of how we can work together to protect and develop our community, and I look forward to new opportunities to develop our engagement. We've recently created a new position of Director of Community Partnerships. If any of you are interested in developing or creating new links with the school, please do introduce yourself to Sarah Blair at the end of this community gathering. And Sarah, wherever you are, please stand so everyone knows what you look like. Thank you also, Sarah, for your hard work in coordinating this evening's event. It's important for me to reiterate that our plan is for our door always to be open, and we shall ask how best we, as a school, can continue to support our local community in order both to serve our local community meaningfully and also to teach our students about the importance of community building. I'd now like to invite Doug, CEO of 13 Ways, former rancher, teacher, politician, cabinet minister, community therapist, and community builder, to introduce us to ways to future-proof our local community. His motto is that there is always a way, and we look forward, Doug, to hearing your advice to our local community as we seek to honour Shawnigan Village's past and present and to find our way, our path to the future. Thank you.
incredibly kind introduction. So look, I need to tell you right now, I don't stand behind a podium, so just adapt. I was a junior high teacher, and when I would sit behind the desk, the kids would pass notes. So, I mean, you're all adults, you can pass notes if you want, but I still like to get up and move. And I get very energized by this presentation, okay? So, I need to clarify a couple of things. I was a junior high teacher, but I started off growing up on a farm, a ranch with horses and cattle. Now, the teaching allowed me to make enough money to buy more horses and cattle. And everything was great. I went off to university and got an honors degree in philosophy, came home, went back to ranching, got a teaching degree, and life was perfect. I mean, I taught in one town, I ranched in another, and I lived in the one in between. And everything was great. Except then I realized all three of the communities I was involved in were dying. Their populations were shrinking, their economy was shrinking, youth were leaving, things were looking bleak. So I started talking about the need for a rural community development strategy to fire up our small towns. I thought that was very important. So I talked to anybody who would listen to me. And I shot my mouth off one too many times, which is how I wound up in provincial politics. If you ever want to get into politics, just keep talking. And if you ever want to get out of politics, just keep talking. It's a good way to do both. So I spent 13 years in the Alberta legislature. I had 5 different cabinet portfolios. I ran for premier, I lost, which was good. I didn't want to be that anyway. And I deliberately retired 4 years ago to go back to do this, community building, because that's what I'm passionate about. Now, out of all those jobs and all those roles that I had with the province of Alberta, I got to do a lot of very interesting and exciting things, but the best job I ever got was what I campaigned on, to write a rural community development strategy. Our deputy premier said, Doug, go write one. I don't care what it looks like. So there are 422 communities in Alberta. And I went to over 200 of them in the first couple of years, and I talked to anyone who would listen to me again. And I wrote a report called Land of Opportunity. And in that report, there were 72 recommendations that covered health, education, community infrastructure, economic development, youth, seniors, tourism, arts and culture, water, wastewater infrastructure, housing, you name it, it was in the report. And then I gave it to the deputy premier, and she said, this is really good work. You need to go tell people about it. So I traveled all over Alberta again, telling everybody what they needed to do around health, education, community infrastructure, economic development, youth, seniors, tourism, arts and culture, water, wastewater infrastructure, housing. And everyone said, this is great work, Doug. And then I realized no one was paying attention. They didn't really listen to the words I said. See, I told every single person in every presentation I did, and I even put it in the report, that the province had to help partner with municipalities and probably the federal government to make communities successful, but they couldn't do it. I mean, with 422 communities in Alberta, the only way communities were going to be successful is if the people in the communities decided they wanted to be successful. But every single time I finished the presentation and said that to them, people would call me up a few weeks later and say, so Doug, when are we going to see some results of your report? When is the province going to do something about the community? When are you going to fix our problems? And so I was frustrated. And then I had a re-epiphany. The first epiphany I had came when I was a junior high teacher. I would go talk to high school students about how to be successful in life, right? And it was a pretty easy presentation. I'd say, study hard, don't do drugs, marry someone nice, right? Pretty easy guidelines. And all the kids would look at me like, yeah, I know, my mom told me that this morning. But none of them did anything different. So I changed my approach. The epiphany I had, I walked into a classroom and I looked at them, and instead of doing my usual presentation, I said, okay, I want you to pretend you're 45 years old and you have ruined your life. What does it look like? Now, these were high school students, so it would take them a minute to warm up, but then they'd start saying things like, I'd become a drug addict. So I'd write that up on the board. I said, what else? Somebody would say, I'd fail out of school so I couldn't get a good job, and then I couldn't take care of my family. So I'd write it on the board. Say anything else? Somebody would say something like, I'd get pregnant or get someone prematurely pregnant. It might not ruin my life, but it might set me back. Whatever they came up with, I wrote on the board. And then I'd say, okay, let's pretend that is your goal. You want to ruin your life. How would you start today? So we look, become a drug addict. How would you start today? Now, they're high school students, remember? So a few minutes would go by and somebody would finally say, well, I guess if I wanted to become a drug addict starting today, I'd smoke a joint after school. And 2 kids would turn red because that's what they did yesterday. Say, oh, you want to fail out of school. How would you start today? And somebody would say, oh, I'd fail the math test this afternoon. And then they'd all look at me like, are you done? I have to go study. Right? I'd say, oh, you want to get prematurely pregnant or get someone pregnant? How would you start today? And they'd all turn red. And that'd sort of be the end of the conversation, right? The point is that every single one of those students had hopes and dreams and goals and ambitions for their future. But every single one of them made decisions and did things that undermined their own success because they traded away what they wanted most for what they wanted now, what was easy and convenient. And then it'll occur to me, it's not just high school students that do that. We all do that as human beings. And then it occurred to me, with all the work I did in communities, I've seen communities do the same thing. I haven't been to a community yet, anywhere in North America, that doesn't have an economic development plan and a tourism plan and an infrastructure plan and a public works plan and a marketing plan. And we have so many plans. We need a plan just to tell us what to do with all the plans. We're not short of plans or visions for the future. But I have not been to a single community out of all of those in North America that does not do things, does not make decisions, to trade away what they want most for what's easy and convenient now. And that's what sabotages their success. So I had my second epiphany, and I started to do a little presentation. And that's how this book came about, 13 Ways to Kill Your Community. Now, there's a few things you need to know before we get started, okay? One, I never name names in this. I have one time I may if I tell you this story, but I never name names because I've discovered when I name the names of the communities, people would come up to me after, or I'd see the look in the face in the audience, they go, oh, I know them, they're stupid. But if I didn't name names, people come up to me all the time and say, did you write that about us? Because we see ourselves in those stories. And in fact, it was proven right to me when, right before I was going to announce I was running for premier in Alberta, and I lost, remember? I got an invite to go to Texas to do this presentation. And I said I couldn't go, but the lady who invited me said, that's too bad. But I know the town you're talking about in, I think it was chapter 7, the 3rd story, and if I guessed the name of the community, would you admit it was them? I was like, yeah, if you guess it right, I'll tell you. So she guessed her hometown in Texas. And I told her, no, you're wrong. She called me a liar. She said, you wrote exactly what we did. And I almost faxed her a copy of my passport to show her I hadn't been to Texas in years, let alone her hometown. And so it occurred to me, everyone sees, so I don't name any names. The next thing you need to know is that there are some very funny stories in this, so please feel free to laugh. If we can't laugh at the problems we're facing, then we can't fix them. And some of these stories are generally crazy humorous, so feel free to laugh. But there's another group in the audience too. If you're not laughing and I look around, generally you're the one sitting there with your arms crossed glaring at me. And I see the look in your eye. You're saying, how dare you talk about me like that? Because you're doing these things. The point is that every single one of us is doing these things. I'm not here to chastise you or criticize you or belittle you or berate you. I'm here to point out the things that you do that sabotage your community's success so you can stop doing them and get on with making this region prosperous and successful, the right it deserves. Okay? And so that's it. That's all you need to know. Are you ready? All right. Chapter 1, forget the water, both the quality and the quantity. Now, the first edition of this book came out in 2010. And I wrote it, and then when I quit being an MLA and I went back to just community building, I rewrote the whole book. So there's 50% new content in this new book. And it was in 2016. And I thought, it's 2016, the 21st century. I don't need to put this in there anymore. I can take this chapter out. No. Water is critically important, and unfortunately in the 21st century, this is still a major issue in so many of our communities, and I don't have to tell you much about it. People demand, no, I gotta quit saying that. People expect quality water. And if you don't give it to them, then they're gonna go somewhere where they can find it. And you know that people will now move out of communities if they don't have quality water. And I thought, you know what? No one's going to get this. And then I had confirmation because Flint, Michigan happened. And you remember what happened in Flint? I mean, there was an argument between the elected officials in Flint and the elected officials in Detroit. And they decided in Flint, we want our own water system. We want to be independent. We don't want to be under someone else's thumb. So they pulled out and went and turned on their old water system. And what happened? 12 people died, at least, from the contamination in that water system. And then I thought, okay, it's over. They cleaned it all up. They turned it back on. And now they're facing multi-million-dollar lawsuits because apparently they had old lead pipes they didn't realize were hazardous, and now thousands of babies, children, have been potentially exposed to lead poisoning. And then I thought, okay, now they must have it fixed up. So I checked. No, just a year and 4 months ago, they finally got a grant so that they could put a water treatment system, just the mini ones, under each kitchen sink in Michigan. Like, that's crazy. It's the 21st century. But we have, and I thought, okay, that's just Flint, Michigan. That's bad politics and dumb choices. But I did some research. On average, 3 communities every week in Canada are put on boil water advisories, and not the ones that last a few days or even a couple of weeks. I'm talking about ones that last months and years. 3 every week. And now I know the majority of those are First Nations communities, but that should be an embarrassment on all of us that we don't have quality water in the 21st century. And if you don't believe how important it is, then after you hear this tomorrow morning, go down to your local gas station and buy a cup of coffee and just hang out by the front counter. You will hear everyone come by and complain that they're paying, what, $3 for a liter? No, it's $1.20, sorry, a liter. I was just in the States, and it's by the gallon. $1.20 for a liter of gasoline, but every single one of them will pay $2 for a little 400 milliliter bottle of water and not say a word because they expect quality water. The quantity of water is equally important. I mean, on the farm where we grew up, we always had this old saying, you can buy the best quality seeds money can buy, put them at the right depth so they grow, put on fertilizer so they have nutrients, put on pesticides to kill the bugs, put on herbicides to kill the weeds, and you know what you get if it doesn't rain? Nothing. You can't do agriculture without water, value-added agriculture without water, commercial development without water, industrial development without water. Tourism development happens better when you have water around. And in fact, every single community, except for Las Vegas, was built because of its proximity to water. It is the most important resource we ever have. And we know what happens if you don't have it. You saw the drought in California. You might not be aware of the situation in Cape Town, South Africa, just last year, when almost 2 million people's lives were in jeopardy if they didn't get rain by the end of the summer last year. Water is critical. It's the most precious resource we have. Now, look, I was in politics. I went through rehab, so I'm fully recovered, and I'm not going back. But I still talk to some of my political friends once in a while, and they tell me one thing, because I'm from Alberta. They often say things like, Doug, the next world war will be fought over oil because it drives the world's economy. Maybe. But the last war ever had on earth will be fought over water, because once someone has control of the water, they have control of everything. If you want to kill your community, forget the water, both the quality and the quantity. Your community may drink from a poison well or die of thirst, but either way, I guarantee you, it will die. Number 2, don't attract businesses, especially businesses that compete with yours. Yeah. So look, I said I went to over 200 communities in that first tour when I was writing the report, and I discovered if I wore a suit and stood up at the front of the audience, people would say to me what they wanted me to hear. But when I got down onto the streets and I walked around in my jeans and a sport coat, people told me what they needed to say, which are always 2 different things. So I spent a lot of time on Main Street talking to people, and I found something really interesting. I would go to communities of 1,500 to 2,000 people that had one grocery store. And I would ask the grocery store owner, how's business? And they would always say the same thing to me. I don't know if we're going to be able to keep doing this. It's kind of week to week sometimes. We don't make a very good living at this. And some seasons I just am not even sure if we can keep the doors open. But I would go to communities of 1,500 to 2,000 people where there were 2 grocery stores, and I would ask the grocery store owners the same question, how's business? And they always said the opposite. They would say things like, well, I'm not going to buy a Maserati and the kids aren't going to Harvard, but we make a good living doing this. It's a good life. Now that seems strange to me. 2,000 people all shopping in one grocery store, can't make a living, but 2,000 people split between two grocery stores and they're both doing fine. How could that possibly be? And then it struck me, competition. See, competition gives us price, quality, selection, and service. Better price, better quality, better selection, and better service. So I would ask people in the town with two grocery stores, tell me about your grocery stores. And they'd say things like, well, I go to that grocery store because they have the best price on canned goods, but I go to that one because they have the best quality of meat. But sometimes I go to that one because they have the best selection of produce, but sometimes I go to that one because the bag boys carry the groceries out for me. Price, quality, selection, service. But I would go to the community of 2,000 people and ask the people in that town, tell me about your grocery store. And they would say things like, well, I want to support local business, but, when I go in to buy a jug of milk, it's $2 more a gallon, and it's usually going to expire the next day. And if I ask them to bring in something special, they look at me like, just for you, you think I can afford something like that? In fact, sometimes I go in there, and the owner looks at me like, I'm busy right now, do you have to be here? And I asked them, so where do you go shop? Where do you think they went? Down the road to the community that had two grocery stores where competition gave them better price, better quality, better selection, and better service. Now, I found it interesting because I was in one community and I found this young couple. They were entrepreneurs. And they opened a gas station. So I thought, okay, I'm going to hear their story. They're young entrepreneurs. I want to interview them. And I found out there was nothing interesting about their story whatsoever. Well, except for one thing. One thing. Their hometown was an hour down the road. It had one gas station. It needed another one. But when they tried to open the gas station there, they couldn't get the building permits. They couldn't get the development permits. They couldn't get the zoning. Even the town eventually quit calling them back. And I asked them, why did they do that to you? And they said, well, I don't know. So I went to the town to find out. I needed to know the story. And I got there and I asked around. I didn't want to know from a couple people. I asked everybody. And they all knew the same story. They all had the same answer. They all looked a little embarrassed, kind of sheepish, and they'd say, well, the mayor at the time owned the gas station across the street from where they wanted to build, and he didn't want the competition. True story. Now, because I had asked everyone about that, and everyone told me the same answer, I'd asked so many questions, people started to tell me other stories. I heard of another couple that wanted to open a bumper-to-bumper franchise, but they couldn't get the same problems, couldn't get the building permits, couldn't get the zoning done. Eventually moved down the road in the other direction an hour and built the bumper-to-bumper. And I said, well, why would the mayor care about that? They said, no, we had another elected councillor at that time who managed the Ackwood's Granger and didn't want the competition. Now look, I started to feel like a Catholic priest on Sunday because people were coming to confess all sorts of stuff to me. I was sitting in town at a restaurant at the table having lunch, and a person came in and sat down, and she looked across from me and she said, do you mind if I talk to you? I have to get something off my chest. I was like, sure, my child, speak. So she said, look, I got to tell you, I was the front person at the town office for over 20 years. No authority, no power. I was just the first person people would meet. And we would have welders come in and say, hey, I want to buy some land, some industrial land. I'm going to build a welding shop and hire a bunch of welders. It's going to be great. Where do I find it? And she would tell them, we have no industrial land for sale. Or if it is, it's environmentally contaminated. You don't want to buy that. Or the school's full of drugs. Or the housing prices are inflated. Or the economy's on a downturn. Whatever she could over that 20-year period to make them leave. And I asked her, why would you do that? And she said, well, because my husband was a welder and we didn't want the competition. And it's funny because this is in one community, these three stories, and many more came out. And I wish I had the power to put you all in a crystal ball and take you to that community with me. And I would call a town hall meeting, and everyone in town would show up, and I'd put you right there so you could watch. And I'd say, ladies and gentlemen, do you believe in competition? And they would say, yes, Doug, we are good conservatives. We believe in the power of business. And I would laugh and shrug my shoulders because that's a lie. They don't. You see, we all say we believe in competition until we're the ones that are being competed against. And then it goes away. And if that happens, it's not a belief, it's a hobby. And it's not worth a damn thing. So if you want to kill your community, don't attract businesses, especially ones that will compete with yours. And you can have a monopoly on failure. Wasn't that kind of cute? That was, yeah? I thought that was kitschy. Okay. Number 3. Don't engage youth. Now, don't ask me this question. I know you won't ask me this question because I'm telling you right now not to. But most communities I go to, one of the very first questions I get is about youth. Doug, how do we keep young people in our community? And I feel like I'll walk out of here and I'll go onto Main Street and I'll see a bunch of young people chained up to mailboxes and light posts so they can't get out of town, right? We just keep them. That's the wrong attitude. The nature of youth is to go off and explore, to go try new things, to have new adventures, to meet new people. You hope they're not doing anything bad, but that's the nature of youth. Your key to success is not to keep them. It's to give them a reason to come home after they're done exploring and to bring everything back with them. But we don't do that. In fact, we don't just not give them a reason to come home. We spend half of our time chasing them out of town. I was in one community and we were having it was like a soup and sandwich, lunchtime. I was going to talk about the future of downtowns and the kinds of businesses you need to attract and how marketing is changing. And it was just, everyone came in and grabbed a bowl of soup and a sandwich and sat down at a round table. There were young people and there were seniors and chamber members and business owners and elected officials and administration, and it was great. 150 people. And no one knew who I was, so I did the same thing I normally did, and I walked around and just listened to conversations. And everyone there was talking the same game. But one guy was especially loud, and he sort of summed it all up, because he sat right in the middle of that room, and he was a big guy with a big boisterous voice, and I heard him say, and everyone else, what are we doing this for? We bring in another fancy speaker, it's not going to change anything. We didn't do what the last guy told us to do 10 years ago. And then what are we going to, we've got businesses closing. Oh no, I know we had a few open up on Main Street, but we've got more businesses closing. We still have vacancies in that new subdivision that we built, and I don't know why we're bothering. Everyone goes to the city anyway. That's where the opportunities are. That's what people need to do. We can't stop them. Now, I did my presentation. I finished and said, any questions? And he was the first one that stood up, and he said, yeah, Doug, what do we have to do to keep young people in this community? And my response was, shut up. Not joking, I was never politically correct, but I did. I was like, yeah, every single one of you was running down the community saying you're the only chance for the youth are to leave, and that there's no hope, no chance of investing, no profit that can be made, and no opportunities created in this community. And then you wonder why they leave. Stop being so negative. Your community is wonderful, and you need to explain to young people they need to venture off and go learn new things and be prepared to come home, because opportunities will be waiting for them when they get here. And then go to work creating them. Don't chase them out of town. And you know what? But if you want to kill your community, you just have to encourage young people to leave. Chase them out of town. And if it's not enough, then remember that youth is synonymous with the future. So when those young people leave your town, your future will leave with them, and it will never return. And your community will die. Number 4, deceive yourself. This means having absolutely no idea who you really are. And it's amazing how many communities are doing that. They do it in one of two ways. First, they try and be perfect. Now, I started with a little exercise on the West Coast here in Canada and just randomly went across communities. 100, the first 100, I stopped. Because randomly going from the West, working my way east, the first 100 communities I found randomly, 54 of them had the same slogan, the best place to work, live, and raise a family, which is a lie, because no community is perfect. Besides, what kind of marketing strategy is that when 54% of the communities you're competing against have the same slogan? But it's a lie. It's actually called over-marketing, and if you ever take a marketing class, they'll teach you about it. It's when you over-promise and under-deliver, and what you over-promise turns into a lie, and then no one believes anything you do. It's like if I said, you've got to buy a cell phone from Apple. I mean, our Apple products are the best. You can go online, you can get your emails, you can make phone calls, you can surf the internet. It will work documents for you. It will take great pictures. If you're busy, it'll mow the lawn, it'll wash your car. The second you tell somebody something that's not true, everything you said is not true. But so many communities say, we're perfect, the best place to do everything. Why would you want that anyway? It's not being perfect that attracts people. It's what makes you wonderful that attracts people, not perfection. And the other way communities do it is when they all follow the same sort of pattern. Bear with me. They adopt an economic development officer. And I say adopt because they don't really go for the gold and pick an economic development officer and empower her. They actually just hire them for the sake of being an economic development officer. And then they put them in a cubicle in the municipality and they say, great, go get stuff. And so what are they supposed to do? They go online and they download an economic development strategy. There are dozens of them for free on the internet. You can go get them. You just have to put your name on it. And all of them say to do the same thing. They all say, go build residential, go build some commercial, and go build some industrial, and everything will be wonderful. And then they do. And you know what happens? You get those plop all over the country look-alike things, right? Where you've got Walmart, Canadian Tire, and Tim Hortons, and a few other fill-ins, right? They don't even rearrange the buildings. They just pick them up and move them to another place. And yet, what's the problem with that? Again, you haven't identified what makes you unique and wonderful, and that's where your competitive advantage is. Not being perfect and not being just like everybody else, but being unique is your strength. I was in one community, and unfortunately, we couldn't save them. They were a beautiful bedroom, not a bedroom community. They were about an hour away from a large urban center, but it was a beautiful place. It was one of those, well, it's a little like this. Beautiful. Aesthetically pleasing, just a wonderful mom and pop shops, like a whole downtown Main Street was full of mom and pop businesses. Strong housing market, they called it a free range community because kids would just walk to school and walk home and everybody watched. And it was like a Stephen King novel before evil shows up, right? And they thought, oh, we need to do something because we have marginal growth and we need to be competitive. So they downloaded an economic development strategy and gave it to the adopted economic development officer who went off and attracted commercial development. And they put it between the town and the highway like you're supposed to do so people get pulled off. And they had the Walmart and the Canadian Tire and the Tim Hortons and a bunch of other stuff. And it was great. At least they thought it would be. Because then they lost their character and their charm and their purpose. They didn't realize where their strength was coming from. And so they realized they had a problem many years later when one of the prominent members of the community had pulled up to a gas station and somebody said, are you moving? You're in a moving truck. Where are you going? And he said, yeah, if I wanted to live in the city, I would have stayed there. But now this has lost its charm and I have to move somewhere else. Now that does not mean that Walmart showing up is a bad thing or that growth is bad. It doesn't at all. In fact, when I wrote that rural development strategy that covered health, education, community, wait, I won't give you the list. You got it, right? When I wrote that report, it came out with recommendations about utilizing rural health care and about rural economic development and utilizing rural schools. And I was so excited because I said the highway goes both ways. People can come out of the city as well as they can go in. And the first phone call I got was from a person who said, I read your report. I don't like the idea about people from the city coming out to use our services and facilities. They'll see what it's like here. They'll see we have a great community. They'll see we have easy access to health care and wonderful schools, and then they'll move here, and then there'll be traffic. I was like, what do you want me to do? And she said, I don't want them coming out here. And I said, but you're the first person that will call me and say, my school's closing, and the hospital's closing, and there's no businesses in Main Street anymore. What's the government going to do about it? You can't fight growth and still expect to be. So there is no right answer. The answer is, find what makes you unique. Decide what you want to be on purpose and get on with it. But if you want to kill your community, deceive yourself. Have no idea what makes you unique and where your future lies. And then you'll be like that when your community dies, because it will. You'll be like that body in the morgue that has no identifying unique features, right? No way to distinguish it from anyone else. So they put a toe tag on it and it reads John Doe. Only when your community dies, it will read the best place to work, live, and raise a family. See, some of them are pretty catchy. Number 5, shop elsewhere. Every chamber of commerce in the free world says shop local. I just finished my MBA a year and a half ago, and there's an actual economic principle that says every dollar spent in a community touches on average 7 other hands before it leaves town. So if I spend money in this community, you get it. You spend it, you get it, you spend it. 7 other people get to spend the same dollar. But for every dollar spent out of the community, it's generally gone for good. So shop local. Except as consumers, we often refuse to do that. In fact, if you open a business in the community, and especially if you've lived there your whole life, if you're a newcomer to the community and you open a business, I'll get to you in chapter 11, okay? But if you've lived in the community your whole life and you open a business, this is what happens to you. First, you invest all your equity and your life savings and wealth into opening the business because you're going to grow the economy, you're going to grow the community, you're going to hire young people, you're going to create jobs, you're going to grow your own wealth. It's going to be wonderful. But then, in the coffee shop, the most evil place on earth, where nothing positive is ever said and very little truth is ever spread, they start to talk. And they say things like, what a stupid idea. I can't believe they'd invest all their wealth in that. We don't have a community and an economy big enough to support a business like that. But if I go buy my stuff from there, when they finally go broke, who's going to fix it? Who's going to service it? Who am I going to get my parts and supplies from? No, that's a stupid idea. And they keep talking in the coffee shop till everyone goes, yeah, that's a stupid idea. And then the business goes broke. Phase 2 only happens if the business survives that opening threshold against it. And so let's say it's still going. It might even be doing okay. It might even be doing really well. And then the coffee shop banter changes. Then it changes to, did you see how much money they're making? Did you see the new house they built in the new subdivision? They bought a new car, and I saw he's got new golf clubs down at the golf course, and she's got new rings on her finger. They're making a lot of money, those greedy business owners. Right? And then they say, oh, I'm not going to make them wealthy. And they keep telling everyone in the coffee shop. And that person who says that will drive half an hour in the other direction to shop in a business that's the same and buy the same stuff because they don't have to see that person's house and car and golf clubs and rings. And all that money leaves the community. And then everyone goes, yeah, no, I'm not doing that either. They make too much money. And then the third phase comes along where the business goes finally broke. Or it gets bought up by conglomerate and all the corporate profits leave town. Or finally, the business owner just moves to a larger center where they're more appreciated and don't get ridiculed about how successful they're being. So they're not embarrassed by it every day. And then, again, the money all leaves town. And then people sit around the coffee shop and say, what do we have to do to keep a business in this community when they're the ones that chased it out of town? Now, every single Chamber of Commerce says shop locally, but I have yet to find a single one that tells business owners, you know, you have to give people a reason to want to shop locally too. This is a two-way street. This is like a marriage. A marriage is not a successful one, 50-50. Because if each person gives half and one falters a little bit, you have less than 100%. Marriage is 90-90. So both give more than they need to, and that way if someone falters, which means consumers and business owners have to help each other as much as they possibly can, which means business owners have to do it too, but they don't often. In fact, you remember the mayor who owned the gas station didn't want the competition? I got invited to another event. And I was driving through that community and I thought, oh, I'm going to see how he's doing because I haven't seen him in years. So I pulled into the community and I pulled up and I into his gas station. I looked up and he used to be a Shell gas station. And now he was a racetrack gas. I thought, that's weird. And as soon as I pulled up, he came flying out. He was like, Doug, I haven't seen you in years. How are you doing? It's good to see you. I looked at him and said, well, you used to be a Shell gas station. Why are you a racetrack gas now? And he said, because we don't sell enough volume of gasoline. They downgraded us to a different brand. I said, why don't you sell enough gasoline? And he said, because people in this community won't shop locally. Now, just for some background, they invited me in several years ago to help that community because as he wasn't the mayor at the time, charged a 5 cent a liter premium on every liter of gasoline because there was no competition. So that was it. And they said, can you help us? Because we can't even talk to him. So I did a price comparison of the region, and it showed he was charging more for gas. So I called them all together. I said, you guys are doing pretty good. You're fairly competitive. But, sir, your gas station, you're charging a lot higher for gas. So could you lower the price? Because what happens is people go out of town to get gas. And when they're out of town getting gas because they're tired of being gouged, they go get groceries. And they go get hardware supplies. And they go out for lunch. And all that money leaves the community. And I asked him very nicely, and he said, no, people have a responsibility to shop locally. So when I sat there, I said, why did you get downgraded? Because we don't sell enough gas? Because people won't shop locally? I looked over, and he was still charging a 5 cent a liter premium on every liter of gas. He didn't even realize he was sabotaging not just the community's economy by forcing people to go elsewhere. He was sabotaging his own business success. But he took no responsibility for it. It was everyone's responsibility but his. So if you want to kill your community, shop elsewhere. It doesn't matter whether you're a consumer or business owner. You have got to make sure that everybody spends out of town. And then not only will your community die, it will die penniless. Number 6, don't paint. You know what? People come up and ask me all the time, they say, Doug, you know what, you had 12 really good ideas, but you wanted 13, so you created don't paint and you stuck it in the middle hoping none of us would notice, right? Because they say, this is so superficial. This is like judging a book by its cover, except a lot of ugly covered books don't get read. In fact, that's why we put an ice cover on our book. It's got a guy standing in a hole with a suitcase in one hand and a cow in the other. I really don't get what it means, but people pick it up. It's also why I called the book 13 Ways to Kill Your Community, because if I had called it Strategies for Building a Successful Community, and there are ones in there, none of you would have read it because I would have fallen asleep writing it. It wouldn't have been interesting. We're attracted to aesthetically pleasing things. Not one of you, people, cars, houses, not one of you in all your days was at a party or a dance or somewhere and you looked across the room and said, oh my goodness, he's ugly. I'm going to go ask him out. You just don't do that, right? And even when you realize how important it is, you've got to understand that it's a cognitive bias that affects the way we think, that we're attracted to aesthetically pretty things. But you can't make it go away. We are genetically encoded that way. Look, I'll show you. A female cheetah comes out of the jungle. She's looking for a mate, okay? So she gets to a clearing in the field, and there's 2 male cheetahs. So she looks at one, and he comes out of the jungle. He's muscular, fit, healthy, right? Nice hair, shiny eyes. Huh? She looks at this one, and it comes limping out of the jungle, tail busted, mangy hair, pus coming out of its eyes. Hasn't eaten in weeks. Which one is she attracted to? She's not superficial. This one gives the indication it's going to be successful, that it's strong. Aesthetics matters to our communities. And I wish I could point it out to some of you. I wish I had the power of Zeus or something so I could pluck a minivan out of some suburb in Chicago and put it in some of our communities, just so you could see the reaction. Because in some of our neighborhoods or downtowns, you'd watch them lock the doors and roll up the windows and drive like lightning to get out of town. Why? Because they're scared they're going to get mugged or shot. Because the communities that they live in Chicago look like those. Now, we know they're not going to get shot or mugged, but what message does the aesthetics, the outward sign of your community, send to people? And I have people come up to me and say, okay, I get it. I get why it's important, but we got to do all the important internal stuff first. We'll do that later. It's a nice to have. Except what happens if you take care of all that internal stuff and don't focus on the outward aesthetic that shows you're successful, and everyone keeps driving by year after year with no idea just how wonderful you are on the inside, because it doesn't look like it on the outside. It matters. Aesthetics matters. And in this day and age, I hate to break it to you, my grandpa's generation was all about utility. It was just what worked. But the next generation, and don't fault them for it, learns everything about the world and is attracted to things by Instagram. And that's all about aesthetically pleasing pictures. You can still have utility, but a coat of paint matters these days. But if you want to kill your community, don't paint. It may actually take a concerted effort to turn your town ugly, and even then, it just puts an ugly cover on your book. It just creates the picture, the illusion that your town is dying. But in the end, if no one's attracted to your community, no one picks up that book to read, that illusion of failure will become a reality. Number 7, don't cooperate. So unless someone here crawled out of a ditch and has never seen another human being, you've cooperated somewhere, right? Your marriage, your sports teams, your business partnerships, just your friends, right? So it's easy. Don't cooperate. Of course, that's a very passive way to make it happen, right? I mean, if you're all here part of this region and you're all determined to be successful and I'm part of the region too, and I look at you and go, no, I disagree. I'm not cooperating. You will all go be successful and I'll benefit from it anyway. It's like school projects, right? We all were in them at some point where they put 4 of you together to work on a project and one person never showed up. So the other 3 worked really hard and you got an A, and everyone got an A, even the one that never bothered to show up. Right? So you're kind of hoping everyone else will fail so you can fail. Very passive. If you really want to kill your community, be aggressive. Compete. I don't mean good competition like I talked about in chapter 2. I mean bad competition. There was a community that I worked in, they had 3,000 people. And they needed a new community hall for community events, right? And so 3 volunteer groups got together and decided to build a community hall. Sorry, 3 groups got together and each decided to build their own community hall. They hated each other. I don't know what they did to each other, but they refused to work together. They competed on everything. And so they competed for the same volunteers in the community. They competed for the same donation dollars in the community. They competed for the same government grants. And in 10 years, at the end of 10 years, do you know what they got? Nothing. Nothing happened. In fact, 2 of the organizations were so vitriolic and competed so fiercely against each other that they had fundraising dinners on the same night. Deliberately. And the community got so upset and so tired of it, no one showed up. And they bought all the fixings and sold no tickets and no one came, so one of them went broke. The other organization almost went broke and came to its senses end and went to the third one and said, you know what, why don't we work together on this? Let's just get this built. They shook hands. From the day they shook hands, it took 1 year before they had the grand opening on a new hall. 10 years of competing produced nothing. 1 year of cooperation had that hall built. But it's not just within a community. It's between communities too. Our communities, I worked in one. I was appointed by the government to help oversee these 2 communities. They each had 1,500 people, and they were 28 kilometers apart. Now, an ag processing firm showed up and said, the CEO, she showed up and she said at a town hall, because they convened everyone, and it was packed full of business people and seniors and young people and elected officials and administrators and from both communities. She said, look, we're going to locate here, but I'm not quite sure where we're going to locate. So I want you to make sure you sorted out the taxes stuff, because we're going to create so many jobs. You're both going to need new subdivisions. You're both going to need to expand your schools. You're both going to need new recreation facilities. It's going to be amazing. So sort it out. And I'll be back in a year and a half with the diagrams. So she left. Now, I don't know who did what to who in 1922. But for almost 100 years, those 2 communities have hated each other. Like, I think one of them lost a hockey game back when they still both had hockey teams to play. But they hated each other, so they had no meetings whatsoever. In fact, one of the communities wrote to the other one's newspaper and said, we're great, we deserve this project. So the other one wrote a letter and said to their newspaper and said, no, we're better, we deserve it. So the other ones wrote a letter and said, you suck. And the other ones were like, no, you're worse. And they started arguing. Now, they wrote letters to the CEO of the company, too. I only saw the first 2, so I don't know how many they wrote, but the first one said, you don't want to go to that community because they are crooks. They will lower the taxes that you'll pay, and then as soon as you build, they'll raise them. They'll jack them up. They're crooks. So the other one wrote a letter and said, oh, yeah? Well, their school's full of drugs and their housing prices are overinflated. None of your employees want to live there, so don't go there. It was crazy. Now, I don't think they showed the CEO those letters because a year and a half later, she showed up in the community like she promised. And she called the town hall again, and table was here. I was sitting right there. And it was the same thing with a whole bunch of people from both communities, but this time there was a 10-foot line down the middle separating them because they had spent a year and a half refreshing their anger and hatred towards each other, so they wouldn't even talk. And she said, tell me what you figured out. And one community said, you should locate with us. And the other one was like, no, we're better. And the other one was like, no, you suck. And back and forth they did right in front of her. And I called her because I wasn't, to me it felt like half an hour. And they were yelling at each other. And I asked her and she said, no, it took 8 minutes. 8 minutes for them to be yelling at each other. And then she stood up. And everyone sat down like she was going to make a decision. Oh, she's going to pick one of us. And I was sitting right there. And all she said to them was, and I quote, what in the hell is wrong with you people? We are going somewhere else. And she left. Now I thought, oh, what a horrible tragedy that is. So I looked up their history. Almost 100 years ago, there were 3,000 people each. Then there were 1,500 people at this time. And now they're just a little over 600 people each. And if I ask them, they'll say, we can't figure out what's going on. But if you look through the newspapers and the history, they have fought on every single opportunity they've had. If they just would have cooperated, at least even ignored each other, the business would have located there and they would have found success. But the fact they competed against each other Made sure that neither of them got the project every single time for 100 years, which is why they were both shrinking. And you know what that's based on? Lines in the sand. I mean, lines in the sand drawn to manage a world 100 years ago or 120 years ago that doesn't exist today. Think of what the world was like years ago. We rode horses to go to school, to go to work. My grandpa would ride the horse in to get supplies and take stuff in and bring stuff out. It took all day 100 years ago. Our political boundaries were drawn because that's how long it took an elected official to come out and see us and get our vote. That's the space they could manage. Our schools were built on 4x4s, 4 miles by 4 miles, because that's how far kids could walk to a one-room schoolhouse to get educated. Our health care was based on how long it took a man with a little black bag to come out and tell you were going to die, because what were they going to do with a little black bag? You were bound to die. What's the world like now? I no longer have to go into town to get anything. I've got Amazon. I can order anything that I want. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for services, not goods. Healthcare, education. My son is 10 years old. He goes online on YouTube when I'm not home to help him with math, where he's found a lady from the States, a teacher, who wears a bright red sweater every single lesson, so she's easy to find, and has broken up all the grade 5 math lessons into little 5-minute increments so that he goes and learns. And she teaches to his style. He asks me, why do I have to go to a school? The little smart guy says, isn't it about education? And I have no answers for him. Healthcare, they now have doctors, robotic doctors, that are millions of times better at diagnosing, prescribing, and helping people than live doctors are. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to become obsolete, but my kids won't need to see the whites of my doctor's eyes like I still feel like I need to. All of this is going to change, and the politics is changing too. And it's not that long ago. I mean, in the mid-'80s, my grandpa and I had a game when we'd come off the field, and it was 7 miles to Coronation and 8 miles to Fleet to sell wheat. And he'd flip a penny, and I'd guess, whichever one I guess, that's the direction we went. Because we, in the 80s, didn't even have a phone in the field to make a call to find out the price. And now, we walk around with technology in our hands, in our phones, that's more impressive than what launched the space shuttles. The world has changed, but what do? We take these lines in the sand that were drawn 100 years ago to manage our municipal boundaries, and we fight over them like they're little serfdoms, little territories and kingdoms we're meant to defend until the end. And we treat the people on the other side like they're the enemy. It's not the same world it was 100 years ago. In fact, I was working on this program for a county and a town so they could get along better. Half an hour into the program, I was telling them you need to work together for economic advantage. And a guy stood up from the county and said, Doug, I know you say those people from town are our friends and our allies. You're wrong. They are not our friends. They are the enemy. They want us to pave their sidewalks and pay for their pools. They are the enemy. And another guy stood up and looked at him and said, hey, doesn't your mom live in town? So I called the presentation. I've seen the enemy, and it's my mom. So if you want to kill your community, don't cooperate. Better yet, compete. Remain fiercely independent and protect those little territories that don't even matter anymore in today's world. And not only will you be independent, you'll find out you die alone. Number 8, live in the past. There are 5 acronyms to describe these people, okay? Now keep in mind, sorry, I know the pew's a little hard on the, keeps you focused, right? That's what my pastor tells me. Live in the past, 5 acronyms. Now, each one is crazier than the last, okay? Just keep in mind as I work my way across the room, the next one's crazier. So we start with NIMBYs, not in my backyard. And those are the kind of folks that know you need to do something, they just don't want it in their backyard, right? And the example I always have is seniors housing. I've been to communities where, you're going to build some seniors appropriate housing, so you pick the plot of land in the community, but then you read chapter 6, so you want to make it aesthetically pleasing, so you plant some grass and plant some trees, good job. You apply for the government grant, and you wait a couple years. And then the grant comes along, and now you're going to build it, and then people go, no, not there. That's my park. That's my backyard. That's my playground. Not there. So you go to the next green space. No, that's my park. And the next one, and the next one. Everyone knows you need seniors housing. They just don't want it in their backyard. They're pretty reasonable, but frustrating. Then you've got bananas. And BANANA stands for build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And they're a little crazier. I worked in one community in Ontario, and they called me in. They said, we have a problem, Doug. Our economy seems to be shrinking a bit. We can't figure it out. Could you come and do a community assessment? So I did. And it was pretty easy to identify that they were a very wealthy, prosperous community, and housing was expensive. It was hard to find a house that was under $1 million. And so it was a really nice community. But I told them, your problem is you don't have a diverse enough housing. Not just affordable housing, but the affordability of housing, right? But they didn't listen. They said, affordable housing, no. Doug, do you know what those people are like? They have too many kids and too many dogs, and they don't mow the lawn. So no, we don't want them in here. So I left. They invited me back a year later and said, it's getting worse. Would you do it again and tell us? And I said, yes. You need a diversity of housing. You need housing for single people that will never get married or have kids. For couples that will never have kids. For young couples that have older kids. Young couples that have younger kids. For seniors that have younger kids. For seniors that are active. For seniors that aren't. Seniors that are single. You need a diversity of housing because diversity breeds success. That's important. And they said, nope, forget it. So I left. Now their economy is shrinking, and I told them, people commute to the community to work, but as soon as they find a job at home, they quit commuting because they can't afford to live there. That means less people to employ, businesses don't open up, it's affecting your Chamber of Commerce, and now it is affecting their housing values because they're going down because no one can afford to live there because there's no jobs. And so they still refuse. That's bananas, right? Then there's the next group. Nope, not on planet Earth. They're even more radical. Now, before I say this, I want you to bear with me for a second. I have an honors degree in philosophy, and my thesis was written on an ethics of the environment. I am a staunch environmentalist. But I have a lot of environmentalist friends, and I'd ask them about, when they get really hard-nosed and they say, all the coal and oil must be left in the ground. Like, okay, I know what you mean, and we definitely need to do things to reduce it, but you can't just start right now and leave it all on the ground. We just don't have enough to replace with wind and solar. So, we need to be reasonable. They're like, no, leave it all in the ground. Nope. So then I asked them, what do you plan to do with the windmills, the big steel ones that need a coal smelting plant to build them? Like, what are you going to do? They're like, I don't care. Nope, leave it in the ground. Now, the danger of those kinds of folks is when, and I have no problem with religion whatsoever, but religion is based on faith. It can't be proven one way or the other. But when we start to call our beliefs faith in spite of the evidence and facts in the regular world, then that's dangerous. We're ignoring truth in favor of our own opinion. And sorry, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. But the world is getting to a place where that's running amok, and people are starting to say, whatever I want to believe is fine. That's why the Flat Earth Society is the fastest growing society in North America. They have over 1 million members now. The Flat Earth Society, they believe all the other planets around except the Earth, it's flat. They don't even realize the irony. In their last newsletter a year ago, before their big conference, their newsletter said, we have new members from around the globe. How ridiculous can you be? But you talk to them, they're like, nope, because they want to believe something, facts don't matter. That's a dangerous time for society. And I believe we need to make very strategic choices, but sometimes we delve to the extreme, and that's dangerous. And then, so you've got NIMBYs, bananas, and nopes, and then you've got CAVE people. And the CAVE stands for Citizens Against Virtually Everything. Right? And those people they're useless. Because honestly, they never offer up any solutions. You go to a meeting and you're talking about solutions and the ideas, they don't come. They don't come. But when you've got together with the whole group and you've talked about what the plan is going forward, that's when they show up and they say, you can't do that. And I have been at meetings where I've said, okay, we can't do that. We'll just go with the status quo. And they're like, you can't do that either. Because that's what they are, citizens against virtually everything. They just are always in opposition and offer no solutions, which makes their opinion worthless. Now, NIMBYs, bananas, nopes, and CAVE people will tell you why they are opposed to something. But the fifth group is even more extreme. They're the least rational, and they're not happy just telling you why they're opposed. They want to make sure everyone else in the room is also opposed. And I call them fears. It stands for fire up everyone against reasonable solutions. Because that's what they do. They do it by spreading fear. I was in a session. We were going to use Poll Anywhere on PowerPoint, and everyone was on there with their phones. It was going to be really exciting. 60 questions in 60 minutes. You voted right away with your phone, and the results appeared live instead of sticky note exercises taking forever. So 150 people in the room. I had the town council lined up here. I had the Chamber of Commerce lined up here. 3 minutes, I got everyone on, and I said, let's go. And a guy stood up at the back and said, I won't work with council. They lost $56,000 in a corrupt deal. They lost taxpayers' money. I won't work with them. And then he got up and walked out and never came back. So I was like, thanks for the contribution. Bye. And I said, okay, let's get back to work. But you know what happened? I mean, everyone in the room was like, what $56,000? What decision was made? What happened? Who got the money? Who made this decision? And the noise level started to go up, and everyone was talking, and I was losing the room. So I thought, I got to get this under control. I went to the mayor and said, what is he talking about? And the mayor said, I have no idea. So I said, well, you better tell people. So the mayor got up and said, ladies and gentlemen, I have no idea what he's talking about. But you know, politics in this day and age, right? People said, liar, cover up. What are you hiding from us? Tell us the truth. So I sat him down because I was scared someone was going to shoot him. And you know what? It was in Texas, so that was a very real possibility. And I said, look, I will find out what he's talking about, I promise. But I knew I was already defeated because he told a room of 150 people, and I wouldn't get them all back, and I wouldn't find out right away, so it would spread. But I did go and check, and it turns out he was telling the truth. Council had invested $56,000 in a really risky venture, not corrupt, just risky. But they were desperate to do something for the community, and they were at wit's end, and so they invested in this risky adventure, and it didn't pan out. So they lost it in 1972. He forgot to tell people it was 40 years ago, right? I mean, I checked, and everyone who was on town council in 1972 was dead. There wasn't even anyone left to apologize to him. But he didn't want an apology. He just wanted people to be afraid and distrusting of everyone who was leading. And you know what? It worked because he left, and he went to the coffee shop, and when we were done, half the people in that room went to the coffee shop with him. Said, you're our guy. You keep these crooks honest. You keep telling us what's going on. We're following you. Well, then he felt empowered. Like he had some special privilege there. So then he thought, this is working. So he told other half-truths or half-lies, depending on how you see it. And it continued to spread. Then he thought, ooh, I'm getting powerful. I'm going to run for mayor. So he declared he would. And he set up a Twitter account and a Facebook page and a web page, and he spread those half-truths on those mediums and continued to spread them around. And if you caught on to what he was doing, he made up something about you guys and told you, and then made up something about you and told them, so you were fighting amongst each other and didn't even know. Look at him. It worked like a top. He, on the 2 weeks before the debate was done, a young lady actually stood up and said, what are you doing to us? You're spreading lies and half-truths and pitting everybody against each other. You are tearing this community apart for your own gain so you can be mayor? Why are you doing this to us? He made up something on the spot about her personal life, and it almost ruined her. And of course, half the room was his followers who instantly attacked her, and the other half didn't know her. So they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. He would take any person who challenged him and just make up something, just trump up charges. Now, I know, it's a true story, though, and he lost the election by 3 votes in that community in Texas. He didn't care. And lots more of politicians are using that these days. I don't care whether you like Trump or not. That's exactly the strategy he uses. And it pulls people and communities apart. So if you want to kill your community, just let the NIMBYs, the bananas, the nopes, the cave people, and the fears own the discussion about what's wrong with your community and how you have to go back to the past. And you'll never plan for the future appropriately, and then you won't have one. In fact, your community will become part of the past. Number 9, shut out your seniors. I got to tell you right now, everyone gets this impression that seniors are this cordial, easygoing group. They are dangerous. They are. They built our communities. Think about what has gone on in the last 60 years in your communities. Most of the foundation of our communities has been built in the last 60 years by those seniors. And they're like I call them the STPs. It stands for the same 10 people. And that's what they do, right? When I was in MLA, I would go to a meeting about economic development in town, and we'd be sitting there, 10 of us talking about it, and then everyone would look like, we got to wrap this up, I got to go. So we'd adjourn. And I would go down the road 10 blocks to another meeting to talk about building a playground, and the same 10 people would show up. Be like, oh, I didn't think I'd see you here. Because they did everything. They sit on county council or the town council. They sit on the village council. They run their own business, or they work 2 jobs. They coach hockey. They put the chairs away at church. Like, they do everything. And so that's what they're used to doing. They were the first authentic community builders that I ever recall. And I remember them. I remember my grandpa building the curling rink in my hometown with his own hammer from the farm. I remember handing him the nails. I don't think I was old enough to stand up. They just did stuff like that. And now I know because of building codes and stuff, we can't do it like that, but that in their hearts, they're still builders. And I know when they retire, they go off. They want to golf. They want to travel. They want to enjoy life. But they come back, right? And they pick places where they want to live and have a quality life. When my grandpa retired from the farm, he and his girlfriend of 25 years, my grandma passed away before I was born. I don't want to give you the impression he had a wife, Anna, right? He was frisky, but I don't think he was that frisky. But they retired, and they spent 6 months of the year in a little community south of Phoenix, Arizona. Do you know why they picked that little community? Because it had square dancing. I didn't see the charm. I went and visited them, and I just didn't quite get it. But that's what they like to do. That was their physical activity and social enterprise. And when they couldn't go to the States anymore and they came back to the farm fully, they actually didn't move back to the farm. They moved to a little community called Viking. And do you know why they picked Viking, Alberta? Because it had square dancing. Now, I have people say to me, that's not my responsibility. I'm not setting up a square dancing club or whatever else they want. Pickleball, I think, is the new big thing. Not my responsibility, forget it. But then even those people get to feeling guilty. And they say, oh, you know what? Seniors don't want to shovel the snow and mow the lawn and do house maintenance, so they want a seniors appropriate housing, like a condo. Not affordable condo, not healthcare housing, just a regular seniors condo. So they can go away for 6 months and be safe. And so they think, okay, we got it. They partner with a private developer and they build seniors appropriate condos, and they think they'll just go in there and play shuffleboard and crib until they die. They'll sneak out. And they will create social enterprise, and they will spend money, and they will volunteer in your community. If you really want to kill your community, you've got to make sure that seniors have to go live somewhere else. And they will take their volunteerism and their appreciation for your community with them. And because they're the foundation that built your community, when they leave, your foundation will crumble, and your house, your community, will come down upon itself. Number 10, reject everything new. So this means keep your thoughts within sight of the water tower. Okay, how much time do I have? Am I going way over? I'm okay? Okay, good, because I'm having fun. So look, when I was a brand new MLA, I was elected in the by-election. It was in April, and so I lived in my truck or car all over the province. And then I stopped in to see my folks in October, and they looked at me and said, you look tired. You need to book a holiday at Christmas. Now, my mom was a travel agent. That's how they subsidized their ranching habit, right? So she booked holidays. So if I booked a holiday, she was going to know because I had to go through her. And they said, we're not joking. You book a holiday or you are coming to Mexico with us and our friends. Now, what more would a 29-year-old young single guy want than to go to Mexico with his mom and dad and their old friends? But I forgot. So I got home at Christmas, and they gave me an envelope, and I opened it up, and there was a ticket to go to Mexico. And the bill. They weren't paying for it. They just said I was going. But I thought, okay, I get along great with my folks. I do need a holiday. I'm going to go. And we had a blast. Like, everyone had fun except one of my dad's friends. I've never seen a man so grumpy in my life. He complained about everything. He hated the Mexican sun. He hated the Mexican water. He hated the Mexican sand. He hated the Mexican food. He hated the Mexican music. He hated the Mexican language. He hated the Mexicans. He hated everything. And I finally asked my dad, why is he so upset? And my dad said, you've got to understand something, son. He's never been out of sight of the water tower. And I could picture him being on the farm, loading up the kids in the back and his wife and driving down the road, rear view mirror going, and when you can't see that water tower, that's as far as I'm going. And it's interesting because I asked Ron, that's who it was, and he said, your dad was right. I'd never been anywhere. And so it was so uncomfortable for me. Now they travel all the time. They just went to Mexico or to China a couple years ago, and they love it. but he had never been out of sight of the water tower. And a lot of our communities keep our thoughts within sight of the water tower. I mean, I bet every single one of you has been to a meeting where you've heard someone suggest a great new idea, and the argument against it is, we've never done that before. That's the point. I mean, the definition of insanity, according to Einstein, was doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results every time. But how many of us just do the same thing over and over and won't try something new? There are rural development institutes in every single province in Canada, all across the United States. There are amazing things you can learn from other people. And I encourage you to do it. You don't have to have something brand new. In fact, a friend of mine, we both failed out of our first year of university together. We had a lot of fun, though. Yeah, my parents were not impressed. So we went back to college and then got back into university. And when we were back there, he went for spring break. Well, reading week, we call it, to the United States, to a community that was just like his hometown. And he didn't plan it right because spring break was Monday to Sunday, right? He missed the first week. He caught the weekend, and then everyone left, all the students, and it was just him in this Midwest town all by himself. But he walked around all week, and he figured out that the town was just like his hometown, and it had one business that was booming and doing well, and that business didn't exist in his hometown. So he came back, he cashed out his tuition, he said, Doug, you should go into business with me. And I said, not after my folks will kill me, thanks. So I stayed, and he went and opened a business in his hometown and put his name on it. And it was a huge success. And he knew it was a huge success because it had already worked somewhere else. And I remember asking him about it, and he's done that multiple times now. He goes to communities and identifies where he wants to open a business, and then finds similar communities and identifies businesses that are successful already and moves them. And he summed it up by saying, they tell us always to learn from your mistakes. Then they tell us, learn from other people's mistakes. Why would you bother making them? And then I realized, why don't we just learn from other people's successes? And there are rural development institutes and communities all over North America that celebrate how they've addressed a challenge. You don't have to do something brand new. You just have to do something brand new to you. But if you want to kill your community, just reject everything new. Not only will your community die, it will go insane as it does it. Number 11, ignore outsiders. Oh, I got to tell you, outsiders have different titles. Fobs, knobs, and down east in PEI and stuff, they call them come from a ways. Like, they don't even sugarcoat it. They just come from a ways. And I didn't know what they did until I was doing this presentation to a group like this. And I was talking about outsiders and how they add value to the community because they picked the community on purpose. And she said, yeah, I'm a come from away. And I was like, oh, I never heard that term. What does that mean? She said, well, I'm an outsider. People look at me and say, you're not from around here. You don't know the way we think. You don't know our history, so shut up. And I said, that's got to be hard. How long have you been in the community? And she said, 22 years. And her friends put their head down like, yeah, that's true. And I've actually done some research, and I think it's a real thing that you're an outsider unless your parents were born in the community, which means most people have to be there 3 generations before they're considered an insider. And yet, why is that? Why do insiders have this? Why are they special? I mean, what are the credentials an insider has besides, well, I fell out here, I guess I'll stay? That's not a little shocking. It's not a credential, it's a birth certificate, and that doesn't make you any more qualified about your community. In fact, outsiders are more qualified because they don't know who did what to who in 1922, and they don't care. They deliberately move to the community, they want to buy a house, they want to start a business, they want to contribute. They're deliberately investing in your community. So listen to them. They have value. But you know what? The biggest group of far outside outsiders are immigrants. And they're in the news all the time, so I have to talk about this. My great-grandpa came over from Europe. He walked partway across the country to get on a boat. And he rode that boat for 3 weeks to get to the east coast of Canada. And then he got on a train where he rode the train for 3 weeks all the way across Canada to Alberta to a little place called Wetaskiwin, where he got off and walked 2.5 days to a stake in the ground to start the farm. Talk about entrepreneurialism and frontiersmanship. That's amazing. I don't know if I would do that if I didn't know what the country was like. But he did. And so many thousands of others did too. Now, that's amazing. I know immigrants don't have to go through the same thing, but look at where they come from. They come from places where they don't have access to clean drinking water. In fact, if you look it up, about 43% of the world has access to clean drinking water of the caliber we have. 1 billion people almost, the best quality water they have is about what we flush down the toilets. That's crazy. When I was in MLA, new immigrants would show up and, you'd stop over to see how they're doing and show them the tap. And some of them would be in awe that you just turn on the tap and it comes out endlessly. Some others, where they came from, you'd show them the hot water tap and they can't believe you don't even have to boil it. It's like, wow. Now, you tell them there's a water bill that's going to cost them $60 a month to ensure quality water, and they don't care because look, it comes out endlessly. We put water monitors on our homes now to make sure that we can keep track of what we're using so we don't have a California or a Cape Town issue. And we complain that it costs $60 or $70 or $80 for our water when most people I know pay more than that for cable TV. And you can't live without water. In fact, my grandpa always used to say, when you're thinking about what's important in life, just remember you can only go for 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food, or you die. You can do without just about everything else. Water's critical. They come from places where they don't have access to grade 6 education. And if they do, it's not like ours. And what do? We complain about the class sizes and the extra fees and how there's too much homework. And then we complain to the teachers, you're not watching my kid enough. And then we complain to the teachers, you're watching my kid too much. I mean, it's just crazy what we do in our expectations. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't always keep making it better. But we have to remember, we have the best education in the world. And I was reminded of that when I was speaking in Nova Scotia, or PI. And this couple came up to me after I did the presentation, and they said, we moved to the Middle East to get jobs in the oil field, and we made a fortune. So then we moved to Italy, and they weren't from Canada, moved to Italy, where we lived for a few years. Best quality of life ever. It was amazing. I said, well, why are you in Nova Scotia? And they said, well, we're still young. We decided to have kids, and we wanted to make sure they had the best education in the world. So they picked Canada. They come from places where they don't have access to post-secondary education. I mean, none where they came from. And so they get here and they work 2 jobs to save up to pay for their education or save up to pay for their kids' education because their kids couldn't be anything where they came from like we have. I mean, our tuition is, $4,000 or $5,000 a semester to be anything you want to be. Anything. A doctor, a nurse, a teacher, maybe a little bit more for a doctor, but amazing. So what do? We complain that it costs too much, even though it's only 20% of the cost of education. We say it costs too much, but I guarantee you, eventually in life, you find out ignorance will always cost you more. We complain that it's too hard to get in and the requirements are too hard, when all you have to do is put down the electronics and study. But we treat it like it's a right instead of a privilege and an opportunity. They come from places where they don't even have the right to vote. Check Freedom Watch. 47% of the world has the right to vote. Less than half. Less than half. And out of those that have the right to vote, 1/3 of them risk getting shot, beat up, or blown up to go exercise that right. So when they get here, they vote. And what do? We're lucky if we get 1/3, 30%, 35% voter turnout in municipal elections, 50% provincial elections if there's a big issue, and 60% federally if we're all mad at Trudeau. Right? And by legislation, we get 2 hours of paid time off work to go vote, and we still, on average in a provincial election, can't get half the people to go vote. We take our greatest, most important franchise for granted. So when they get here, they say, thank you so much for this opportunity. I promise not to waste it. I will take advantage of it. And we bitch and moan and complain and sit around in the coffee shop wondering when somebody's going to do that to make it better. When's somebody going to fix that problem we have? When somebody's going to make my community better? I have news for you. You are somebody. Go get it done. Sorry, my therapist says I should keep doing that. It's good to vent. But you know what? So if you want to kill your community, you got to keep the outsiders and the immigrants on the outside. You got to build a wall. Right? And it'll keep them on the outside. And it'll work, you'll think, for a while, but then just before your community dies and you die along with it, you will look up those walls that kept everyone out and realize you died in a prison of your own making. Number 12, grow complacent. That's it. It's so simple. Just grow complacent, right? This is the tortoise and the hare story. You know it, right? The hare and the tortoise were going to have a race, and the hare said, I'm so much faster. So halfway through the race, he laid down and had a nap, and the tortoise crossed the finish line and won. right? Lots of communities do that. They assume they're ahead and they can take a rest. They can stop. That's horrible. It fails every single time. I can usually find a community that's doing it because they use the word sustainable in their strategizing, right? We need a sustainability strategy. I hate that word. I'd like to ban it from the English language, at least in terms of community growth, because everyone I talk to who uses that word doesn't mean sustainable. They mean status quo. We just want status quo. Like, it's a giant safety meeting. Nobody moves, nobody gets hurt. We just want a sustainability strategy. Nothing to change. And yet, things will change, because if you try and have a sustainability strategy where everything remains the same, one business will close, I guarantee you. And when it closes, that's 13 jobs lost. That's 13 people in the community that no longer have jobs that have to leave to go get them. And they take their families with them. So that's less kids in your school, less utilization in healthcare, less volunteers in your community, less money spent. 13 families not spending money could be enough to cause another business to close. There's 13 jobs lost. There's 13 people that have to leave your community because they lost their jobs. They take their families with them. Less kids in your school, less utilization in healthcare, less volunteers in your community, less money spent. You see how it starts to spiral out of control? Instead of using words like sustainable, use words like vibrant, dynamic, aggressive, enterprising, entrepreneurial, anything that says you're going to do something about your community. Have a vibrant, dynamic, entrepreneurial youth strategy. Like, name it with something fierce instead of something mundane, because it'll drive you to do something. And then if you do it, and a new business opens up right when one closes, you've stayed right where you wanted to be, because you were aggressive. But if one doesn't close and one opens, that's 13 new jobs. That's 13 people that don't have to leave your community, or 13 new people that can move to your community for the jobs. And guess what they bring? They bring their families. That's more kids in your school, more utilization in healthcare, more volunteers in your community, more money spent. 13 new families spending money could be just enough to cause another business to open. 13 more jobs. You see how that goes? If you really want to be successful, you've got to realize there's no such thing as just staying here. The world will always change, and you need to be aggressive and change with it and find new opportunities, or they will all leave your community. And you won't even know it, because you'll be laying down having a nap. And it'll become a dirt nap. Eh? Oh, ooh. Yeah? Okay. I always wonder if that's too far, but... Last one, don't take responsibility. It's just that simple. I mean, I hardly have to say anything about this one, but I will, because you've heard me talk for... We confuse the word responsibility with blame way too much. There's a reason why they're different words. They have different meanings. So I hear people say, I'm not responsible for the price of commodities. I'm not responsible for the policies of our federal government. I'm not responsible for Trump down south and what he's doing. I'm not responsible for all of that. No, you're wrong. You're wrong. And you mean you're not to blame for those things, but you're still responsible for them. And it's like you have a job. And you have a horrible boss and treats you horrible all year, and then one day walks in and says, you're fired. You're not to blame for that, but you are still responsible for what you're going to do about it. You cannot get rid of responsibility. Are you going to sit down on the sidewalk and cry? Are you going to go file a human rights complaint? Are you going to go find another job? The responsibility for what you do is up to you, not anyone else. But so I tell communities, if you want to kill your community, don't take responsibility. But that means you got to find someone else to take it on, right? I like to blame the mayor. It works really well, right? The mayor, the council, the administration, we used to go to church 20 years ago and pray for a miracle. And now we show up in the town office and demand one by Friday, right? That's what we do. Yet the mayor and the administration and council are not responsible for everything in the community. They are only responsible for the municipal corporation. And so if you do this, the mayor may push back and say, no, Doug said you're responsible too. So then you got to find someone else who hasn't heard the presentation. Go to the premier. Say it's your fault. Go to the prime minister. You're responsible for my community. Go to the United Nations and make it their responsibility. Blame ISIS. If that doesn't work, pick a teacher, a preacher, a doctor, a dentist. It really doesn't matter. You can blame the kids that play hockey on the street before the arena ice goes in. Ultimately, none of them are responsible for the success of your community solely. The only person responsible for the success of your community, and the only person you can control and not absolve of responsibility, is you. And you. And you. All of you. Look, after doing this for 20 years now, 13 as an MLA, before this advocating for communities, and probably for the rest of my life, I hope I wind up unemployed someday, but it doesn't look like that'll be the case. But advocating for communities and telling people they need to do something about it, I've discovered something. A group of people, a community that decides it's going to be successful cannot be stopped by any government. But a group of people, a community that decides it's meant to fail and there's nothing it can do about its own fate cannot be saved by God himself. If you believe you're meant to fail, we have a tendency to prove ourselves right on purpose every single time. Now, some people get a little inspired by this, and I've heard that the best coping mechanism from groups, that they'll go to the coffee shop or somewhere, and they'll be talking, they'll hear someone being really negative, and they'll look at each other and laugh and go, he's being a chapter 7, right? And it takes away their power instantly and makes it inconsequential. That's great. It can work wonders, but at some point, you're going to be alone, and you won't have someone else to share the burden with you. And that's a challenge. Because when someone is constantly telling you, stop, give it up, it won't work, you have a tendency to want to push back and get angry. Don't get angry, because we never make smart decisions when we're angry, ever. Instead, if you're all alone and someone looks at you and goes, it won't work, it can't happen, it can't be done, just look at them like I do and smile and say, those who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those of us who are doing it, and get on with it. Thank you. Q&A, I'm always here. Does anyone have any questions? Anything they want to ask? Most people were pretty intimidated, and they're like, I'm not saying anything to you. Sure.
One thing that you said, I loved your presentation. I thought it was really good. One of the things that sort of my own personal thing, is when people use the word NIMBYism as a negative. And I look at this community who turned NIMBYism into a huge positive, because they said no more contaminated soil in our community. And I just would like to point that out, because it can be a positive. Thank you.
Yeah. So look, when I talk about NIMBYism, I know it gets misused all the time. NIMBYism is when something is valuable to the community, but you look and say, well, I just don't want it in my neighborhood, so you figure it out. That doesn't offer any help, and it doesn't help address some of the challenges. But with your contaminated soil, I'm glad everyone said it, because that shouldn't be in anyone's backyard, period. So, okay? So I 100% agree with you. Yes, sir.
I'm sitting here with the mayor of Ladysmith. No, no. When you were talking about the dangers of the coffee shop and coffee shop shooting everything down, he made a point that I think is valid, and I want your opinion on it, and that is the coffee shop is Facebook today. Facebook today.
I post stuff on Facebook that's positive, and rule number 1, don't feed the trolls. And so you need to understand something about Facebook and a lot of social media. All the research has indicated that 5 negative comments in a row on any one subject, the argument's over. It's done. Because 5 negative comments in a row force most positive people to disappear. They're like, I gotta go do something else. And all that's left are people who are looking to be negative for a reason, so you might as well quit. But Facebook is like the coffee shop, the negative coffee shop. Now you can't leave it and ignore it completely, but you gotta post positive stuff. And look, I'm gonna give you a tip, okay? It's around fears, and it's around that negativity. I learned how to deal with fears, believe it or not, when my son was tired. My wife wasn't home and there was a storm, and so I put him to bed. And a few minutes later, he got up and he came into the bedroom and he said, "Dad, I'm scared. There's like scratching on the window." I was like, "Okay, let's go." Go in, and I opened the curtains and showed him, "Oh, it's just branches. Nothing to be afraid of." I gave him facts, okay? And that's what we often do. When people are angry or afraid, we give them facts, okay? So he came back a few minutes later and was like, "Dad, I'm still scared." And I was like, "Okay, son, come on, let's go. It's nothing to be scared of." We looked under the bed. Nothing to be afraid of. Facts. And put him back into bed. Like 5 or 6 times he came back, and each time we explored a new place, and I said, "Look, there's nothing to be afraid of." And I think I held him a little higher over the bed before I dropped him in every time. I was getting tired and frustrated, right? I'm a real person. So, and then I suddenly realized he was just afraid, and my facts didn't matter. And if you think when someone is afraid of flying, facts don't matter. You can tell them it's the safest form of transportation. I tried it because my wife is kind of afraid of flying. We hit some turbulence. I was like, "Hun, don't worry. 1 in a million chance the plane will fall out of the sky from turbulence." I almost got punched in the face. It's like, why would you bring that up? Right? Facts don't matter when people are afraid. So when you're dealing with fear, I took my son back to his room. I lay down on the bed. I was telling him how much I love him and how much I'll protect him and how much his mom and I make the home safe. I went on for like 10 minutes. I bet you he was asleep in 2. I didn't even know. Because we often fight fear with facts. What you need to fight fear and the negativity and the critics is positive, hopeful emotions. Where someone's, the guy that said, "I won't work with council," the $56,000, if I'd known the facts, or even if I didn't, if I was the mayor, I would have said something like, "Look, I don't have any information about that, but I promise you I'll look it up." But what we're doing here today is focusing on the future of this community. We can talk about what one person did wrong at some point, but we still have a community and children that are hoping that we'll come up with some sort of plan for success for the next 40 years. So we can sort that out later. But who is going to sit here with me and work out a plan for success? And lots of people will be like, yeah, okay, let's go. And then you get them focused on something positive instead of just with facts. So on Facebook, be positive endlessly, slide facts in there, and if you got 5 negative hits in a row, give it up.
Hello, I'm Jason. I'm an outsider. I'm from Cape Town. You mentioned Cape Town and the water crisis that we have there, and it's really bad. Firstly, thank you for coming, and we need more events like this. I think it's very important that we discuss these things. I think we need to relook at the word community and what it means today, because the word community 50 years ago has a different representation to what it is today. And we really need to look at that definition and ask ourselves, what does it comprise of? What does the new community look like? But my question to you is this: how important is it for us to have gatherings like this, or get together on a Sunday as a whole community? And what does that look like?
Yeah, that's great. Oh, awesome. Oh, where do I start? It's incredibly important. So here, I'm going to tell you a few things that people don't want to go to meetings anymore. They don't necessarily avoid things like this because it brings the community together, but social opportunities where you bond over an issue instead of going to a meeting, and especially millennials, they're not interested in going to another damn meeting. They're interested in quality of life and living. And they also, if you're going to get them engaged and get them included in the community, how do I explain this? When my generation works, we spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week at work, working with people, okay? Same with my parents. When we got home, we were tired and we were peopled out. So we went in the basement and we turned on a big screen TV and we zoned out. We cocooned from the rest of the community. And it grew more and more intense. Millennials spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week online working. That's the way the world's evolving. And so when they're done work, they don't want to go look at another screen. They want to be in a real, authentic community. So they don't want to work 80 hours a week to climb the corporate ladder, to get a title, to then get listened to. They spend so much time online where titles don't matter, and they work in flat environments problem solving and finding solutions. So when they come out, they want to socialize in your community. They want to be part of groups, but they don't want to be part of an organization any more than they don't join companies either, because they don't want to belong to something. They want to focus on issues. So they'll come out to meetings as long as it's not, hey, the Elks is having its meeting the third Tuesday of every month. Why don't you join our group? It's like, I have other things to do. Oh, but we've got a bunch of people coming to make sure we can build a playground. Oh, I could get involved with that. They want to focus on issues, not on organizations. So social events are exactly what they're looking for, and that's the only way you're going to really capture the next generation and make it meaningful. But these events are what gel a community and give it a collective consciousness and understanding of where it's going. Before you do strategic planning or a community-wide economic development plan or pick what your future is, you need to have a few more meetings. I would love to do another presentation for you guys, although I know it's late because it's also an hour and a half long, about millennials, about downtowns, about the future. So keep gelling, but don't think that it's going to be focused on organizations and becoming members of one club. Millennials don't care about clubs anymore than they care about companies. They want results. Oh, and so here's one more bit of advice. No offense to any elected officials here, okay? But because millennials don't value titles, they're not working to be vice president in charge of something before they get listened to. They are online solving problems in a flat environment. When they come out, if there's an issue in the community that needs to be fixed, they'll come and talk to you once. They will come to you and they'll say, oh, it's the mayor or it's the CAO or it's somebody else, and they'll say, we need to fix this. And if you tell them, well, we got to do first reading and second reading, committee of the whole, and then third reading, we have to have public consultations every phase like that, so probably 2 years we can get it done, they'll skip right on by you and fix it anyway. Your biggest issue with local government now is not whether or not you're going to be effective for the next generation, it's whether or not you're going to be relevant to the next generation. Sorry, that was a lot of information in a... Yes.
So we've all heard the information that you've given us now. So where do we go from here as a community? How do we get together, and how do we do some problem solving?
So there are all sorts of tools in the book. You can do all sorts of exercises. When we get hired by the community, we usually do a lot of interviews and we do block engagements. It grows up into a collective town hall. You can use the poll anywhere and do assessments about where the community's at and what the biggest issues are. You can do the 2 lists exercises we outline in the book, where you gather in small groups and task everyone with making 2 lists, one of all the problems that need to be fixed, from easiest to most complex, to the great things about the community you should celebrate. But you need to figure out, ultimately, what makes you unique, like one thing that makes you really unique that you're going to focus on, and it's complementary parameter, and where you're going to go from there, what you want the community to look like 20 years from now, and then get on with it. Yeah, one more question. Good.
So I'm going to go out on a limb and speak for some of us and say the Chapter 6 don't paint for Shawnigan is just litter and dump wherever you like, because nobody cares. It's just bush, it doesn't matter. And Shawnigan, we do care. We do care where stuff gets put, and if we can be faithful in those little things, just even taking care of litter, it translates to, no, you cannot put your junk in our bush.
Yeah. You're going to have, there was a community, they painted all of their fire hydrants, and it became the talk of the entire province in Ontario. There's a community that has paint days, so there are companies that will recycle your paint, blend them into other colors, and they collected all the used paint, and they had a paint day, and then a company donated to contribute, and they painted derelict buildings and abandoned buildings, which just brightened the community up. It looked like a neighborhood in Newfoundland right on the coast, and it just brightened everything up. You can paint murals, you can do all sorts of stuff. You'll get pushback from folks with old used vehicles who are like, I can do whatever I want on my property. That's great, but if their neighbor set fire to their house, they'd be like, you can't do that, right? Those ultimate. Hypocrisy is the worst thing in the world. It drives me. So you have to push back and say, I'm sorry, but we're going for a certain feel and a certain charm here, and when you buy into it, you have to commit to it. But But aesthetics matters. And it's Disney, Walt Disney, was the one that discovered that on average people walk 10 feet to a garbage can. That's why on the main street in Disneyland, they have a garbage can every 10 or 12 feet. And it is spotless, because people will, but on that, they'd start to drop things. And they did the research on that, and they put cover tops on them, and that's why Disneyland is so aesthetically pleasing. Paint, clean up. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Now for the 14th way to kill your community, give the microphone to a politician. Speaking of elected officials, it's customary at big community events like this to acknowledge the politicians. I don't want to miss anyone. Could the politicians stand up? Come on. The elected officials, councillors, mayors, my fellow directors. And so, Doug, essentially, thanks. Essentially, you just gave this presentation to 84,000 people, to the whole Cowichan Valley. If you saw the Focus newspaper this week on the back page, volunteers are mentioned, and nothing happens unless there's volunteers, and of course, tonight is no exception. We've created a group called Think Shawnigan, and the members include Netta Boss, she's the chair of the Shawnigan Community Center. We have Laurie Trelaw, the executive director of the Shawnigan Museum, Sarah Blair, the director of community partnerships at Shawnigan Lake School, Hadi Goddard, my alternate director, Keith Bridge from the Shawnigan Residents Association, I know he's here somewhere, Amy Melmock from Economic Development Cowichan. So this Think Shawnigan team mandate is to help promote change, positive change for the future of Shawnigan Lake. So this presentation we feel was perfect, and thank you, Laurie, for the idea, and for Marion Davies for influencing that. And a big thank you to the Shawnigan Lake School students who've been helping throughout the night. I'd also like to acknowledge our sponsors. Shawnigan Lake School, of course, who's gone far and beyond and contributed in every way possible. The Cowichan Valley Regional District, Les Biola of Turner Lane Developments, James McKenzie of Shawnigan Storage, Island Savings in Mill Bay, Bill Mulazin from Shawnigan Village Family Practice. I hope he's here. I haven't seen him. Gordon Smith of Cowichan Woodwork Limited, and Pat Linneman from Shawnigan Eco Industrial Park. Thank you to our sponsors. Just a quick, our team tried really hard to get the word out tonight, and I don't know how many people would be here. Let's say maybe 300. But if you could just really quickly with your hand let us know how you found out about tonight, that would be really great. So if you came because of the postcard that came in the mail, was that what got you here? Thank you. How about the newspaper or radio ad? Okay. Wow. An email from SRA or a church, or okay. Thank you. How about Facebook? Is that what got you here? Oh, that's a bigger one. And how about old-fashioned word of mouth? Wow, okay, the influencers in our community. We're hard at work. Okay. Did Doug leave? So Doug, thank you so much for your presentation. It was it was fun and a great satire, and we really did not like seeing ourselves in the stories that you told, so we will forgive you for that. Anyway, thank you. And our CAO from the I'll introduce Brian Crothers really quickly, our CAO from the CVRD.
Great, thank you, Sierra. Thank you for coming out. Amazing turnout tonight. I want to thank Doug and acknowledge his provocative, humorous, I think inspiring presentation to get us thinking. Doug accomplished exactly what the Cowichan 2050 speaker series was intended to do, was to invoke thought, to invoke inspiration, to have people thinking about their community and what the future might look like. It's exciting for me to be standing up here because normally, and I see lots of familiar faces, normally when I'm standing up in front of a group, it's usually because there's an issue. And I'm talking about a problem in the community, and there's usually people that are fairly upset and opinionated. But you're all here tonight because you want to make your community better. And that was what Cowichan 2050 and the speaker series was all about, and this is the 9th in a series. You know, moving forward, you asked the question about what does this mean for the community, and the CVRD is going to be here to support the community, the Think Shawnigan group. We've got some processes that we hope can help the community move forward. These are challenging times for the region. We're faced with increasing growth right across the region, particularly down here in the south end, with this compelling desire to want to maintain our identity and want to maintain what's unique about our communities, and that creates a challenge. But it's going to take you folks together, coming together to define, as Doug said, what makes you unique, what's important about your community, what are you trying to preserve, and work together. You've got some exciting times ahead. You've got some development poised in the community, and I think you want to be ahead of that. You want to be helping to influence what that looks like. You've got other challenges with growth, soils. You've banded together and you've done some amazing work as a community, so you should all be proud of yourselves for the work that you've done. And we're happy to be here to be a part of it. I'm going to take out the notes that Amy gave me to make sure that I don't miss anything, because there are some acknowledgements that we need to make. And I have to acknowledge the Think Shawnigan group for being leaders in their community and bringing you folks all together. And also the Shawnigan Lake School for being a partner in this and hosting this amazing event. So again, thank you all for attending. I hope you took something away from tonight. Doug had some very interesting thoughts, and having been working as a municipal manager for the last 20 years across the province, I can tell you for sure that you're not alone. And I saw something that in every community that I've worked in or worked around in Doug's presentation, and sometimes we need to acknowledge where some of our weaknesses are before we can move forward and address them. So thank you everyone for coming. We have a reception at Mitchell Hall following the presentation. On behalf of the CVRD, the elected officials of the CVRD, and our sponsors, thank you all very much for coming out. And Amy? Sorry?
I just want to acknowledge the support of Island Savings as well. I know Graham Service is here tonight with his team, so we do want to acknowledge their support, not only for this event tonight, but also for the series, the whole speaker series. And we'll be saying a few words about them at the reception, so thank you.
Thank you, Amy. That was my fault for missing those diligent notes, and also the Real Estate Foundation for their support for this event. So thank you everyone for coming out, and see you over at Mitchell Hall. Thank you again to the Shawnigan School for hosting us. Thanks everyone.